Welcome to Show Me Sports Legacies. Today we're here in the studio with my co-host, Chris Hockenfels. Chris, it's the dog days of summer, and we are not stopping any of our travel, any of our enjoyment of the things that summer brings, and that rare time as an academic person that you get the chance to go out and have some fun.
Yeah, one of the great things about being in education is having the summers to travel with your family, with friends, to block off a week or two to go see a baseball game or go to a theme park or go camping, whatever your family likes to do, especially when your kids are in that great range that they want to travel with you and you can go out and see part of the country and travel and you have the time to do that. And that time and that window is quickly closing because it's August now and school's right around the corner.
And you did your 20th baseball park?
We did. We hit Cincinnati and got rained out the first night, but that's okay because we went to Claiborne Farms in Paris, Kentucky, and got to see where Secretariat hung out for the last 16 years of his life and make that tour and then back up to Cincinnati to the Great American Ballpark to watch the makeup game the next day and then home. So it was a quick trip, but it was a lot of fun. And I have a food report from Cincinnati if you want that one.
I got a question before you do.
Okay.
Was there any Skyline chili involved?
Well, funny you say that because that's what I've got here for my food. Since we've hit that topic the last couple episodes, and that seems to be a theme now we can run with is, of course, when you go to Cincinnati, when we looked up what do you eat, it's Skyline chili. And so at Cincinnati, we both had the Skyline chili hot dogs. They're kind of a double mini hot dog covered in Skyline chili, then covered in a mountain of cheddar cheese. And that's kind of their signature concession at the Reds ballpark. And that was really good.
I was at the Reds ballpark one time. It was 95 degrees that day. I was eating Skyline chili and sweating down the first baseline.
Hey, well, that's where we sat too. That's part of the experience is having a little Skyline chili. I even believe that the Kelsey brothers have talked about Skyline chili on their podcasts because they're both Cincinnati boys, went to the University of Cincinnati, played football there. And so if you go to Cincinnati, check out the Skyline chili. It's not just at the ballpark. It's like a fast food style restaurant that you can see just about every 4 or 5 miles. You look up and you see a Skyline chili sign or billboard, and people love it there.
We had a sporting day yesterday, actually, and we decided we needed to go somewhere for lunch, and we went to the mothership of all gas station food places.
I know where you're going with this.
Okay, Joe's Kansas City Barbecue. Used to be Oklahoma Joe's back in the day. It's been there a long time. There's still gas pumps that work there. I'm not sure I'd want to pull up to them and send the exhaust fumes over the patio eaters. Really had some good food there, a little brisket, a little sausage, some onion rings. But we had a good time, and it's just a classic, and you got to get down there and see it.
Yeah, and you can get your quart of oil and your windshield wiper fluid while you're in line. I mean, there is
some dry rub.
Yeah, and some dry rub and a T-shirt. And also, they run a huge pickup service out of the back of the gas station, so you can order and then come drive through and pick it up. And I've never been in there where it hasn't been busy and at least a little line coming out the door. And I've been there a time or two where the line is so far out the door that you've got to say, is it worth me being outside for an hour and a half to get my burn-ins? And sometimes the answer to that is yes, because they're so good.
Okay, so they've done that for decades. Like a lot of barbecue places in Kansas City, they have a long history. And there's a guy that has a long history with the Royals that was honored last night, Salvador Perez, who since 2011 has really been the face of the Royals.
Yeah, and what a player for the Royals to bring all the way from the minors into the World Series, into another playoff run later in his career, and now for him to hold one of the most prestigious records in franchise history. Kudos to Salvi. We've talked about on our podcast before his Hall of Fame worthiness and all of the accolades he's collected, and now he's got another one. To be a franchise leader in Major League Baseball and home runs is a big deal, and he deserves every bit of it. I think he'll hit some more, and he'll probably end up, if this is his last year, he'll end up in the 320s, 325. If he comes back next year, he could get to that 350 mark.
Love to see him get in that top 10. I think he needs 4 or 5 more home runs to get in the top 10 all-time of catchers home runs. And last night, there was a nice ceremony before. George came out and said a few words. Salvi didn't talk, but his family was out there with him, and you could tell he was enjoying the day, and the fans loved it. And every time he came up to bat, people were hyped up.
And one of my favorite things about the Royals organization and this isn't true everywhere, is I believe there are three greatest players in franchise history all started their careers with the Royals and ended their careers with the Royals. And that is Alex Gordon, Salvador Perez, and George Brett. So they didn't, become free agents and go play for the Red Sox or the Yankees or the Cardinals. They were Royals. Any uniform they put on in the major leagues had the KC on it. And that's really an accomplishment these days in and of itself.
So today we're talking about longevity and success and excellence. And we have as our guest today, Coach Mel Tjeerdsma, who turned Northwest Missouri State into a football dynasty. Coming in 1994, survived those early years, turning over the roster and get things pointed in the right direction with national championship wins in 98 and 99. Then still in the hunt, dominating the MIAA. Then a run of 4 consecutive national title games with losses. And then on that 5th try, they got it in 2009. I retired in 2010. So over that period of time, won a ton of games, dominated the MIAA, 3 national championships, and created a brand for Northwest. The Bearcats were something everybody knew about.
You want to talk about putting a school on the map from a Division II football school that no one really knew about unless you lived in Northwest Missouri to a national powerhouse that was playing on ESPN, that had buzz nationally for recruiting and game slots on television and games at Arrowhead with rivals. From 0 wins to national championship runs under the direction of Coach Tjeerdsma is pretty incredible, and his long run of success is something to be noted in the state of Missouri for sure.
Well, we're going to get a chance to interview him and talk about that, and I can't wait to hear the stories.
Yep, it's Season 3, Episode 10. Let's go.
Today we welcome Coach Mel Tjeerdsma. He's a retired college football coach who's the winningest coach at 2 different college football programs, Austin College in Sherman, Texas, where he won 59 games in 10 seasons, and Northwest Missouri State University in Maryville, Missouri, where he won 183 games. His Bearcat teams won 12 MIAA titles, made 7 national title game appearances, and won 3 NCAA Division II national titles during a 17-year run at Northwest. He's a member, and Coach, I may be wrong on this, you're a member of at least 6 Hall of Fames that I'm aware of: the Missouri Sports Hall of Fame, South Dakota Sports Hall of Fame, College Football Hall of Fame, NCAA Division II football, MIAA, and Northwest's M Club Halls of Fame. Are there any I'm missing?
I think that's close enough. Pretty good.
Coach, we are pleased to welcome you to Show Me Sports Legacies and happy to have you with us today.
Well, I'm happy to be with you. I look forward to I always enjoy talking about Bearcat football and things in the past, so this will be great.
Well, we're looking forward to letting in our listeners on some of those stories. Now, on this podcast, we always do origin stories, and we talk about people coming from small towns, and you grew up in a small town in South Dakota.
Yes, I grew up about 4 miles west of Springfield, South Dakota. I grew up on a farm. We had just about a section of land. I think we were 40 acres short of a section, so we had crop. Part of it was crop, part of it was cattle, and enjoyed the simple life and went to Springfield High School. Springfield High School was a small high school. We had my class, I think at the time, was one of the biggest classes. We had 30 in our class. Prior to that, I went my grade school, all 8 years of grade school. I went to a one-room school. There's not many of those left. And I always joke with people that I was valedictorian of my 8th grade class because I was the only one in my 8th grade class. I went to a small college right there in Springfield, Southern State College. I got my degree, and I guess from there it's history. I started coaching, and that's been my career.
I saw some South Dakota articles, and they kind of highlighted one of the things I noticed, that you were part of a championship relay track team, kind of a sprinter, apparently.
Yeah, that's using the term sprinter real loosely. I was the 4th fastest guy that we had, so I had to be on the 440 relay. But yeah, we started out. My oldest brother, I had 3 older brothers and an older sister and then one younger sister. But my oldest brother was a state champion in South Dakota in the 100 and the 220 and the long jump, I think. I think he won 2 of those 3. I know he won the long jump, and I think he won the 100 and got second in the 220. And then they won at that time it was the 880 relay. They won that. They won the state championship. And so I always had, that was always in my mind that I wanted to, to be like that. And so I had this love for track. And even though I wasn't real talented, I was able to, like I said, I was the fourth guy on the sprint relay, but I was the anchor on the mile relay. And I loved running the 440 and mile relay. Sometimes I'd run the 440 in the sprint medley. So that was probably my first love when I was in high school, is track. And that's not true for a lot of people. It was kind of interesting. I only had one coach. He was a head football coach, head basketball coach, and head track coach. We had three sports, and he was only about 3 years out of college. He had played basketball and football at Southern State, which was in our hometown. So he was kind of my idol. He was a great player. He was a quarterback, 6'3", 6'4" type guy, and had a lot of energy. And so all of that really kind of led me, like I said, he became my idol when I started high school. And I just grew up in those sports, and I wanted to do everything I could to please him. And I got a lot to thank him for. So John Wessling was his name.
When we talk about classes of 30 people, you pretty much have to play all the sports to be able to field teams and be productive. And you played basketball. And I wasn't going to tease you, but I enjoy when I go back and read old articles out of the newspaper, how they make reference points, things that we don't say anymore. And we don't call basketball cagers very much anymore. And that prompted me to think about why would they use that term? And apparently that was a holdover for those tiny little gyms where they literally had the court encased and didn't have any sideline. And we have a lot of gyms in North Missouri that barely have any sideline. So,
well, we had a nice gym because we had the college there. Matter of fact, when I was in grade school, the college played their games in our gym, in the high school gym. But I had the opportunity to play in some really small gyms around when I was in high school. We played in one gym where the center circles and the center circle intersected with both free throw circles. And the ceiling was out of bounds because if you put a lot of arch on your shot, you were in trouble. You had to shoot it flat. So those were good memories.
Chris and I, as old men, played on some of those courts and enjoyed the fact we didn't have to run the full length of the court.
Right. Some of those small gyms are what makes small schools in North Missouri, and I'm sure all around the country, unique, because sometimes you walk in, there's a stage. Sometimes you walk in, the scores table's protruding out onto the floor because it's so small. Sometimes they have I think they call it the restricted line, where the out-of-bounds line, you had to stand in between and the other team couldn't get closer because there was just no room, because there was the out-of-bounds line, then a wall, but there was a second line where the person could throw the ball in. So all of those gyms make it unique, and so there's advantages to playing at a small school.
Yeah, we had most of the gyms I played in had the restriction line, and that was part of it. Some of them had, because the courts were so short, they had a double center line. So when you were going one way, it was your center line.
Right,
when you were
right.
going the other way, and a different center line, so that you had a little bigger front court.
Now talk about your football experience and what led you, and did you always know you wanted to coach? Did you want to take playing as far as you could? How did football play into all this?
Well, it's kind of interesting because, like I said, my family was really spread out. I had 3 brothers and a sister. The youngest of those 4 was 11 when I was born. So like my oldest brother, who I was talking about, was a state champion and a very good track athlete. I never saw it. I don't even remember ever seeing him run. He was out of high school by the time I was starting to develop a memory, and so I for whatever reason, and, they all ended up on the farm. 2 of them ended up teaching some. My sister taught, and then 2 of my brothers were teachers. But for whatever reason, I wanted to be a coach. I mean, that's as long as I can remember, that was my thing. And I can remember elementary school as a little kid going out in the wintertime and scooping the snow off in front of the garage, and we had a basketball hoop on the garage, and I'd be out there with my gloves on and shooting baskets, and it never did me any good. I was never very good at basketball, but I just had that love for it. And then in high school, like I said, my high school coach had a real impact on me. And Coach Wessling, he was a special person. And so I really, whatever the sport was, I was going to be there. I played football, basketball, track. That was the only sports we had. We didn't have baseball. We had kids baseball. I played a little bit of that. On the other hand, I never played junior high because I was in a country school. We didn't have, junior high sports. So the first real organized sports I played were in high school.
And it's really neat to hear your stories about your coach, because there's a lot of coaches, myself included, that coach because I had a great coach and I learned a lot from a great coach and inspired me to want to do what he did for kids. And we hear that in coaching stories. A lot of the people that we interview, there's that mentor, and sometimes it's not necessarily a coach, but maybe it's a parent or an aunt or uncle, someone that coached that gave you the fever to coach. And to hear that you had that same experience is pretty neat.
Yeah, I think we got a television when I was in elementary school. And of course, the one thing I found on there right away was Major League Baseball. So I watched a lot of baseball when I could, and, any sports that came on. And when college football was on, or the NFL, I was always watching that. And then the Olympics. And I was really fascinated by the Olympics, especially, again, the track part of it. So those things all played all had an impact on my thought process, I guess, is what I wanted to do. And then the other thing was South Dakota, at that time, farming in South Dakota, we didn't have the tractors, the equipment that you have now. And in the spring, when you're out there on the disc in a field or dragging a field or on a cultivator with no cab, no radio, you're just, the wind's blowing, the dirt's in your ears. And that didn't appeal to me a whole lot. So it wasn't a real hard choice for me.
I understand that. I was a small town kid. I don't claim to ever have been a farm kid.
What's my avenue to get me off this tractor?
That was about it.
Right.
So out of college, you kind of got into the high school football world.
My first job was at Akron, Iowa. And Akron is a little town just north of Sioux City, about 20, 30 miles north of Sioux City, right on the Sioux River. At that time, Akron, we probably had about 200 kids in high school, something like that. I was assistant football, assistant basketball, head track, and head baseball. In Iowa, you had baseball in the summer. And so I coached the baseball team too. And I did that for 2 years. We weren't real successful in football or basketball. We had some pretty good success in track. I was able to get a lot of kids out and create an interest, and we did well. After a couple of years, I got the opportunity to go to Sioux Center, Iowa. At that time, Sioux Center was a little bigger, beautiful town, Dutch community. But the thing that really attracted me to Sioux Center was that they had an all-weather track. This is in about 1969, I think, is when I went to Sioux Center. And they had one of the few all-weather tracks in the state of Iowa at that time. And so, and being a track coach, and at that time, my whole goal in life was to be a Division I track coach. That was what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a college track coach and eventually be a Division I track coach. That was my dream. And so I went to Sioux Center. I was a head track coach and assistant football coach. And Sioux Center was a basketball town. They had only had football for like 5 or 6 years when I went there. Before that, they didn't even have football. And so basketball was a big thing. We weren't very good in football. When I was an assistant, we might have had one 500 year, but we had a great class coming up. And after 3 years at Sioux Center, the head football coach, resigned to go back to Nebraska to be with his family. His parents were aging, and so he resigned, and I was fortunate enough to become the head football coach. This was 1972, and that was the year, 1972 was the first year that Iowa had playoffs in football. Before that, they had a mythical state champion. They didn't have any playoffs, but at that time, they put in playoffs, and in our class, I think we were 2A. In our class, they had 4 teams in the playoffs, and you had 2 playoff games. They had Northwest, Northeast, Southwest, Southeast. And so we went undefeated. The first time in the history of Sioux Center High School, we were undefeated regular season. We got in the playoffs. We won both playoff games. We were state champions. So my first year as a head coach, we were undefeated, had an undefeated season and a state championship. So I got the feeling that coaching was pretty easy.
Yeah, you were like, hey, this isn't so bad. I could do this more.
I joke that my wife could have coached some of those guys and had a state championship team. I'm serious. It's just unbelievable what came out of that senior class. Doctors, and there's 2 or 3 doctors that were in a class of about 40, veterinary, successful businessmen. It was amazing. And besides that, they were extremely good athletes. So I stayed there 2 more years. So I was at Sioux Center 6 years total. The last 3 is as a head football coach. And then I got an opportunity. I really wasn't looking for an opportunity to go anywhere else, but I got a call from Denison, Iowa. Denison was a much bigger school. Denison had about 600, I think, 500 or 600 in high school. I got a call from them and asked if I'd be interested in the head football job there. And so I went down and interviewed and liked it. And so I took the job there. And so I was the head football coach at Denison, as it turned out, for just 1 year. They were a team that was building. They hadn't had a lot of success, but they were on the verge, and I reaped the benefits. We were undefeated that year that I was there, and then lost in the playoffs. So, football was the thing for me.
So, and then you ended up at Northwestern College?
That's correct. After 1 year, after that year at Denison, I got a call from Coach Larry Corver, who's now a member of the College Football Hall of Fame. Great, unbelievable person, unbelievable coach. I got a call from him and wanted to know if I would come and be the offensive coordinator for him. And he was a head football coach and head track coach at Northwestern. And he said, I'll give you track. He said, you can be the head track coach. And so they worked that out. And of course, that was really appealing to me because I still had in my mind I was going to be a Division I track coach. So that was the perfect path. And I was there for 8 years as the offensive coordinator and head track coach. And we really had some great success there. I had a lot of fun. I learned so much from Coach Corver. I learned a lot of football, don't get me wrong, but I learned a lot about how to handle people and how to get the most. I've never been around an individual that could get more out of a young man, 18 to 22-year-old, than he could. He was an unbelievable motivator, but in a very positive way. It was a real blessing for me to have that opportunity to be with him for that number of years. And it was unique. We didn't have great facilities. We shared an office, so I got to sit in with, he'd have kids in and be lecturing them on this or that. And so I got to be a part of all of that. And it was a perfect situation for me.
Were you always kind of an offensive guy when it came to football? Did you enjoy calling plays and running an offense? A lot of times head coaches are either a defensive guy or an offensive guy and tend to give the reins to the other side to another coach. Was that just something that fell on your lap, or were you always an offensive guy from the start?
Well, that's a good question. I enjoyed offense. I liked the creativity of it. And so when I started in Akron already, I was the offensive coordinator there. And then at Sioux Center, my first 3 years, I was the offensive coordinator there. And then I became the head coach, and I coached the offense. And one of my assistants was the defensive coordinator. At Denison, I coached the offense. I had a defensive coordinator. And then, of course, at Northwestern, I was strictly the offensive coordinator. And when I was at Austin College, my first head coaching job, I was basically the offensive coordinator as well as a head coach. I called the plays. And so, yeah, I've been an offensive guy really my whole life. I just enjoy that part of the game.
I like that area of Iowa. I've been up there. My mother-in-law came from Ironton, Iowa. And,
Ironton's right outside of Orange City. That's good Dutch area.
It is.
I'll tell you, Orange City and Sioux Center, they're two sister towns, but they're very, very, very competitive with each other. And they're about 10 miles apart, but both of them are just beautiful cities. I mean, you could go there and right now, and you could, if somebody laid some food on the street, you could eat off the streets. I'm serious. They're all Dutch. They have a lot of pride. Matter of fact, they have bumper stickers up there that are shaped like a wooden shoe. And on the bumper sticker, it says, if you're not Dutch, you're not much. And, that kind of tells the story in Northwest Iowa.
Before I ever went up there, my wife said that I had to understand that her mom was scrubby Dutch and you could literally eat off her garage floor.
There you go.
Scrubby Dutch.
You know exactly what I'm talking about.
I do. And one of the relatives had been the queen of the Orange City Parade, I think, one year.
Oh, the Tulip Festival. Yeah.
So
our oldest daughter was in the Queen's Court when she was a senior. She wasn't a queen, but she was in the court. And so we still have pictures. We had Carol and I had to wear Dutch costumes, so I even wore wooden shoes for a couple of days.
Well, I like that part of the world, so I can understand why you settled in there and kind of developed your career there. So that's excellent.
Okay, so was the mascot of one of those two schools the Dutchman or not? Because now I'm running, who gets to call themselves the Dutchman?
Orange City High School, I think they're the Dutchmen. Sioux Center, we were the Warriors.
Okay.
And Northwestern was the Red Raiders. MOC, it's Morris Orange City, and now Alton is part of it too. I'm pretty sure they're the Dutchmen. And then you go down to Central Iowa, Pella, I think they're the Dutch. I'm pretty sure they are too. So,
okay, so speaking of mascot names, you went to Austin College shortly after that. So let's talk about that. But you were a kangaroo at that point?
That's right.
I have that in common with you as a UMKC graduate.
Okay. Yeah.
The only other kangaroo team that I know about. So tell us about that, going down to Texas.
Like I said, we had a lot of success at Northwestern. I think in the 8 years I was there, we were in the playoffs 4 or 5 times. My last year, we won the NAIA National Championship. So when we'd have these playoff games, we hosted a lot of them. There would be a host coach that would come in, or an athletic director, and they would basically run the game. And one time we had the athletic director from Emporia came up, and he was our administrator, and I got to know him real well, and we talked a lot. And at that time, I think that was in my last year there, it was my second to last year. And I just told him, I said, I'm interested in becoming a head coach in college. And he said, well, he said, I'll keep that in mind. Well, then he told me before he left, he said, I got to be honest with you. He said, I'm going to hire a new football coach at Emporia. But he said, I don't think I could hire you. He said, I don't think you've got experience enough that it's a Division II program and that. Mm-hmm. But he said, I'm pretty sure I'm going to hire the guy from Austin College. So he said, I know the athletic director there. I'll put you in touch with him. And so that's how I got connected. And believe it or not, that was after the 81 season. I went down to Austin College for an interview, and I didn't get the job. They gave it to somebody else. And so I went back to Northwestern, and I was kind of, I was disappointed. I'm competitive. I thought I deserved that job, but I didn't get it. The next year then was the year that we won the national championship at Northwestern. And I can see my wife coming down on the field. We played the championship game. We played Pacific Lutheran, Pac Lutheran. We played them in Tacoma, Washington, in what was called the Tacoma Dome. Beautiful facility, seated about 25,000, 20,000, something like that, but an indoor facility. And we scored late in the game to win. But I remember her coming down on the field and giving me a hug. And she said, the first thing she said is, aren't you glad you didn't get that Austin College job? That was what she said to me. Yeah. And I said, yeah. I said, I think the Lord had other plans for us. And then about 2 weeks later, I got a call from one of my former players, a Sioux Center high school player that lived in Dallas. And he called me and he said, hey, Coach, that Austin College job's open again. And I said, you got to be kidding. I said, that was a year ago. I said, it's not open. Yeah, he said, it is. And so I checked it out, and it was. The guy that was there was a guy by the name of Stan McGarvey, and he was there just 1 year, and he got a chance to go to the Canadian League, the CFL, as an offensive coordinator. So they were back in business, and I applied, and this time I got it. So then I was off to Texas.
Well, hey, and how about that AD at Emporia? Every time on his couch, he had to watch you go to 7 national title games in D2. And when he said to you, I don't think I'm going to hire you, I'm going to put you in touch with somebody else. He probably thought about that a couple times.
Yeah. Well, he did. He was gone after a few years. So I don't think he was the athletic director at Emporia when I came to Northwest. I think he was gone then. Yeah, that was pretty interesting. The coach, Larry Kramer, who had been the coach at Austin College, then became the head coach at Emporia. He was there a number of years. Matter of fact, my first couple of years at Northwest, Coach Kramer was still head coach at Emporia. So we got to be very good friends through all of that.
So it's kind of interesting how people move through these systems, and your career kind of did this slow burn a little bit, instead of you were the brand of choice. We always have an offensive coordinator that's the hot new head coaching prospect in D1 and so on and so forth. But you just kind of stepped it up at each stage. Well, you became the all-time winningest coach in Austin College history over that 10-year period.
Well, yeah, we had pretty good success. It was a tough situation at Austin College. When I went there, we were in a 6-team league. It was the Texas Intercollegiate Athletic Association. We were NAIA, but our league was non-scholarship. And we were in a league. There was 3 private schools and 3 state schools. The state schools, Tarleton State, Sul Ross State, and Midwestern, it didn't cost anything to go to them. I mean, $500 a semester probably was room and board. We were sitting at Austin College at that time. We were already up to $15,000 a year or $17,000 a year, and it was really hard to get kids that had need, because they had to take out loans. There was no way we could have that much financial aid for them, and so they ended up taking out loans. And there were so many. Texas was unbelievable, the talent there, and especially in Sherman's right on the edge of what I call the Piney Woods. East Texas is, we always referred to as the Piney Woods, and it's a beautiful area, but a lot of real small towns with a lot of really good athletes. And so that was a key for us to recruit those kids. But it was hard because, those kids had to take out loans, pretty big loans at that time, to be able to go. And the only thing that we could sell them on is that Austin College had a tremendous reputation. And I could look at alums and I could point out alums that had done the same thing, and now they were, they had their own businesses. A lot of them that went to Austin College, it was known for its pre-med. We had a lot of players that after they came for pre-med for 1 year, they switched to something else, because Austin College they took a lot of pride in their med school placement, and so they washed them out in a hurry. And after that first year, a lot of our guys decided to go and be a lawyer or an entrepreneur or something like that. They weren't in med school very long. We had very few guys that ended up going on through and going to med school. We had some. Because of that, the reputation, and because the alums were so visible, that's how we sold kids. And the good thing was, it wasn't just a sell job. It was the real thing. And I can look at, I'm still really tight with a lot of players from Austin College. It's a unique situation. It's a family, and I can look at a lot of those guys that came from nothing, had nothing, and now they're very successful businessmen. They're successful educators, whatever it is. And so that was the thing that that was our selling point, but it was true. That's what I liked about it. It wasn't a fabrication. If they would go through, they were going to be successful.
That's great. I'm interested in how you were there for several years, and then you end up in Maryville. What drew you to Northwest? Northwest at that time, it wasn't really dominating anything. Obviously, it was struggling. It was struggling in funding. As I recall, I read an article, and it doesn't shock me because I drove 71 Highway many times because my dad went to school in Maryville. My wife went to school in Maryville. It was a 2-lane road. You didn't have a big football stadium. You didn't have the facilities. And they were questioning, vis-a-vis Missouri Western, who was going to survive that funding battle with the state. And there was just a lot of uncertainty there. What drew you to come to Northwest?
Well, I loved Austin College. One of the greatest experiences I think I could ever have. First of all, there were great people at Austin College. I had unbelievable coaches, just really good human beings. And the the athletes that we had were first class. Everything was good, except that we were getting further and further behind because of that state school, private school thing. And our costs were going up. And, there was no way the state schools in our conference, instead of having 3 assistants like we had, they had like 6 assistants. And so it was just a battle. And in my mind, I had the goal of going to the next level. And so I applied for a couple of Division II jobs and was close on one. And then the Northwest Missouri job came open. And so I applied for that. And at that time, Dr. Jim Redd was the head of the physical education department. He had been the head football coach at Northwest at one time. Well, they went through a change. Dick Flanagan was the athletic director. He retired. And when all this happened, and so Dr. Redd became the athletic director. And at least I knew him a little bit. And so he had recruited some of our kids when I was at Denison. And so that's kind of how it all started. Just I really wanted the next step. And so I was a little naive at the time. I thought wherever I'd been, we'd won. I thought we can win anywhere, and especially if I get to pick my own staff, I get to build my own staff. And so I really didn't think so much about that. Talk about, I brought along a young man that had played for me by the name of Bart Tatum. And Bart came along as an assistant. And after we were there for a month or so, I remember Bart coming into my office and he said, Coach, he said, did you research this job very much before you and I said, no, I'm sorry not, Bart, because I didn't realize how good the conference was. First of all, the MIAA was a good conference, and there were a bunch of really good coaches in there. You had to be a good coach, but you had to have athletes too, and we just it was a struggle at first. We didn't have a good reputation. Our facilities were probably, I would say, one of the bottom 2 or 3 teams in the conference as far as facilities were concerned. Maryville is not a spot, a vacation spot or anything like that. No. A destination spot, let's put it that way, that kids want to go to. And so we had some challenges, but it was the first time that I got to hire my own assistants. At Austin College, I inherited the staff that was there, and they were great coaches and great people. But this is, I got to hire my own staff. My first hire was Jim Sabota, who was later the head coach at Central Missouri and
Go Mules
at UCLA and Montana State. But Jim played for me at Denison. The year that I was at Denison, Jim was a sophomore. And he just had such a passion for football. And then he came to Northwestern. We recruited him to Northwestern, and he played for us at Northwestern. He missed the national championship. He graduated the year before, but he stayed around and helped us coach that year. And so we had a great relationship. And so he came as offensive coordinator. I said, Bart Tatum was a young man that had played for me at Austin College, and I brought him along to coach the secondary. He was a running back. We didn't have a defensive coordinator, but I was there for a few weeks, and they had the National Coaches Convention. I didn't go, but Jim did, and Jim called me from the Coaches Convention. I don't know. I think it was out in San Francisco or California that year. And he said, hey, I got a guy that I've worked with that'd be a good defensive coordinator. And I had somebody I was going to hire, and it didn't work out. And I said, well, who is it? And he said, his name's Scott Boswick. He said he coached with me at Nebraska Wesleyan. I said, well, have him call me. And so Scott calls me, and we had a great conversation. He's from Omaha, and I said, well, I'd really like to interview you. I said, maybe when you get back from the convention, we can work something out. We can get you up here. And he said, well, I can be there in a day. He said, my wife's a flight attendant, so I can fly anytime I want.
Perks.
Said, great. And so he came in and interviewed and became our defensive coordinator. And then John Gustafson had just come here the year before as a strength coach, and he was our defensive line coach. So that was my first staff, and I kept him for 10 years. We did not have any turnover the first 10 years we were here. So that has so much to do with the success of this program, is the continuity we had of our staff. And then even though I had those assistants, I also had 4 grad assistants, and they rotated every 2 years. But we did, between myself and our coaches, we did a great job of hiring grad assistants and getting a nice mix of former players and guys from other places. And those grad assistants saved us. There's a number of them that are out, now as head coaches. Joel Osborne is a head coach at Benedictine. Phil Behill's a head coach. I shouldn't have started this because I'm going to miss some people. Well, Adam Morrill played for us and then was a grad assistant. He's been an extremely successful head coach. So, that made a lot of difference for us. That was really the thing I think that got us over the hump. We had 4 grad assistants, and they were full-time assistants. They just didn't get paid. They lived on a grad assistant salary.
I don't think he was a grad assistant, but do you remember a fullback from Worth County named John Adwell? Did he play for you?
Oh yeah, John played. John was on our team when we came. He was probably a junior, going to be a senior, or maybe
right.
He was going to be a junior. He played. John played 1 year for us for sure. He might have played 2, but yeah, he was the thing I remember about John is he was as hard-nosed as you could come. He was a fullback. And of course, we came in and they had been a wishbone team. And so he was perfect for that fullback and wishbone. But when we came in, we went to I formation and one back, and it kind of took some of his usage away. But he ended up being a really good player for us. And just like I said, he had what we were looking for as far as attitude. He just loved the game, and he was there to work. And we needed that really bad.
John and I started coaching at Trenton together. We both got our first jobs at Trenton High School, and both coached. I coached freshman football, and he was junior varsity. We're both, varsity assistants. And he since went back home and has got state titles and success back up at Worth County.
Yeah, that's. I think that's really neat. Matter of fact, I think he's a principal there too.
Yeah, right. Yep.
Yeah, and so that just shows that he was one of those guys that could do a lot of different things, and more than anything else, he just had great motivation. He got the job done.
We did a couple episodes ago about walk-ons in Division I college football, and we had Matt Stewart, a reporter for Fox 4 Kansas City, who played under Gary Barnett at Northwestern. And when he first arrived, they were a laughingstock in Division I football, and by the time he left, they'd been to the Rose Bowl and won the Big Ten title a couple times. And he talked about the culture and how Coach Barnett had to build that culture. And you had that rough first season with no wins, but you could probably see over the horizon. And I think you kind of didn't take any shortcuts there. You had a lot of redshirt freshmen to build out your program in coming years, and that paid off.
Yeah, when we got here, one of the things that as coaches that we agreed on right away, we were going to redshirt everybody if we could. We just felt like that was at that time, some schools were redshirt and some weren't, but we felt like that was the way to go. Now that first year, unfortunately, we had some freshmen that had to play. That was, I say unfortunately, it was unfortunate for them because they graduated, their last season was 97 and our first national championship was 98. So they weren't actually on the field, but they were part of that, making that national championship. That was something that, like I said, we just agreed on as coaches. We said, we're going to redshirt. We're going to give them a year in the weight room. John Gustafson, like I said, was our strength coach and D-line coach, and he did a great job in the weight room. He created a great atmosphere. And those kids, you take a kid like Seth Wand. Seth came from Springfield Catholic. He must have came in about 96 or 97, but he came in, he was 6'5", and I think about 245. Probably could bench. I don't know if he could bench 245. And when he left, he was still 6'5", but he was over 300 pounds, and he was benching right at 400 pounds. And he was,
wow.
He was drafted in the third round by Houston and ended up playing a number of years in the NFL. So those were the kind of kids that made this program, and we had a lot of those kids. So I'm really I'm glad that we stayed with the redshirt thing. We went after that first year. We went a number of years where we never played one true freshman. There are very few guys from 95 teams through probably really rest of my career there, the last 15, 16 years. You could probably count on one hand the number of guys that played as true freshmen, unless they were a specialist, a kicker or a long snapper. We had a few of those play, but as far as actual on-the-field players, very few of them played.
I saw an article where a pretty integral part of your first national championship team, your quarterback, Chris Greisen, who became a D2 All-American, said that he was about ready to go home to Wisconsin, but he had so many friends on the team that they talked him into hanging in through that redshirt freshman year.
That was hard, and it was really hard for those guys because at that time they couldn't see the results. 4 or 5 years later, when Chris was a junior and a senior, those kids that were freshmen redshirting then, they could see the results because we could say, hey, here's Chris. He redshirted. Now here he is, all conference. He's an All-American in his 5th year, and that's where you're going to be. And that was because redshirting, we talked about redshirting right away. When we brought them in as recruits, when they came in on visits, we told them straight up front, and more than likely we're going to redshirt. Well, that all sounds good, to most of them. They say, oh, yeah, I want to do that. Well, then you get there for fall camp, and here they are. They're used to being the star on their high school team, and all of a sudden they're on scout team. and you're on the road the first week and the travel roster's up and they're not even on the travel roster because they're redshirt. And that's pretty hard to take. And so it took a few years to develop that mentality. But once we got past that, they just all accepted it because they knew they could see the results of what redshirting really did for them.
Well, after that tough first year, then you just got slightly over the hump in year 2. And by year 3, everything's kind of rolling. In fact, you're 4 years before national title, you were 44-8. And I think 5 of those losses were in that second year. So talk about the buildup and getting to that first national title and what you remember. Did you know you were going to turn the corner? You were going to get there in that 98 season?
Well, I think some of it was a little bit of, I don't know, I don't want to call it ignorance, but I mean, it was just everywhere I had been and most of our coaches, we had won. And so we just believed we were going to win. And that first year that was hard to stomach. I kept thinking, we're good enough coaches, we'll win 4 or 5 games, and we didn't win a game, and so it was frustrating. But on the other hand, we could see what was happening. We saw what we had with the young kids that had redshirted, and then the recruits. Our recruiting class in 95, would have been the spring of 95, after the 0-11 season, was one of the best recruiting classes we ever had. And that's hard to believe that we could recruit guys that ended up coming to a school that was 0-11 the year before. Chad Thompson was an offensive lineman, and his dad would remind me of that all the time. He'd say, I just don't know why Chad picked Northwest when you guys were 0-11 and we came there to visit. But then he said, you'd never know it by talking to your coaches. He said they just all believe you're going to win. And he said it spilled on to the kids, and I think that was the way it was. And the kids that had redshirted in 94, they knew they were on the path. Once we got going in 95, it was pretty interesting. Yeah, just a quick story. After the 94 season, of course, like I said, we were 0-11. Last game of the year was at Missouri Southern. I remember distinctly John Lance, who is now deceased. John was a coach at Missouri Southern, and he and I were friends because he had been at Southeastern Oklahoma when I was at Sherman, Texas. Durant, Oklahoma is only about 30 miles from Sherman, and we had scrimmaged, so I knew John pretty well. He's a great person, and we were out there warming up, and of course, we were 0-10, and he said, that you got a good-looking quarterback there. And I said, well, you won't see him today. And that was Chris Greisen, and we had traveled him. I said, there's no way he's going to play. I said, we're going to redshirt him. And I said, but you'll see a lot of him after that. And so, it was interesting. We got home after that loss. The next couple of days, we evaluated our whole squad. We had to make some cuts. We had some older guys that just they didn't fit. They weren't buying in like we wanted them to. And so we had to make some cuts, and we did that. And then I remember Jim Sabota. Jim thinks things out real well. And Jim said to me, Coach, he said, we never set any goals. And I said, you're right. I said, my goal has always just been to win. And, I said, we've never had to do that because we just won. He said, well, I think we need to, to set some goals. And I said, I agree. So we had a team meeting. I think it was at the start of the second semester. And I'll never forget, we sat in a room and we had all our kids in there and we said, okay, we're going to set our goals. What goals do we want to have? And of course, right away, somebody said, oh, we want to win the conference, and somebody, win a national champion. You know how kids are. And I remember we had a big defensive end who didn't say much. He was a very good player, but he was real quiet. And he got a little quiet in there, and he said, he said, I think our goal should be to win a game, since we didn't win a game last year. and that's where we started. And then I said, my goal would be to win the bottom half of the conference. And they kind of looked at me, and I said, well, we had at that time, we had Southwest Baptist and Rolla, trying to think who else at that time. Missouri Southern was pretty good. But some of the teams that weren't as good, Washburn at that time wasn't real good, Emporia. I said, let's see if we can go. I had 6 schools listed, or 5 schools. And I said, let's see if we can go 5-0 against that group, the bottom half of the conference. And we did. We went 6-5, and 5 of those wins came against those schools. And so that was kind of the start of where we finally started believing that we could win. Then the young kids that had redshirted, a lot of them played that second year. We played the last game of the year. That year we played at Pittsburgh. And they were 10-0. We were 6-4, but we were 6-2 in the conference, which was amazing. And we went there, and they were getting ready for the playoffs, and they could care less about playing Northwest. I mean, home game for them. We ended up playing them really well. I think it ended up like 8 points or 12 points, probably 12 points. But I'll never forget in the locker room we're in the locker room, and right after the game, and one of our redshirt freshmen, no, he was a sophomore that year because he had played as a freshman. He was a big tight end. And I remember him slamming his helmet into the locker, and he said, "We can beat these guys." He said, "You got to believe that." He said, "We can beat Pittsburgh State." And that was the mentality that we had to have. So the next year, we rolled pretty good, and we got a little help during the season. We won our 2 non-conference games. We had tough non-conference games. We played South Dakota State and Mankato. Those were tough games. We won both of those. We got on a roll in the conference, won our conference games. And we ended up, we were 10-0 going into the last game of the year, and we played Pittsburgh State at our place. This is 1996, and they were 9-1, but they had a conference loss, so we'd already clinched at least a tie for the conference. And of course, it was a big deal. I mean, all of a sudden, Northwest, what are we doing? We're 10-0, and people were all excited. And I remember our guy that had the sporting goods store in town. He had a T-shirt made up. And it said, "The Thrilla in the Villa" was the theory.
I like it.
Unfortunately, we got about 4 inches of rain that night before the game, and we ended up getting nipped 40-0 by Pitt. And it was a quagmire. We made the playoffs, but we weren't able to have a home game because we tore the field up so bad. And we said we needed T-shirts that said "the dud in the mud." Was more appropriate than the Thrilla in the Villa. But it was interesting because that team, after getting beat 40-0, I mean, just humiliated at home by Pitt, we turned around. We had to go on the road to Nebraska, Omaha, and they were the champions of the North Central Conference at that time. I don't know if they were undefeated. They might have had one loss. If they were either undefeated or had one loss, and we had to play there. Ended up being a sleet. They had a turf field, but it sleeted, so it was slick, and we beat them on the last play of the game. And, that was the first playoff game that Northwest had ever won. And to see those guys come back from a week, 7 days before, being totally humiliated, to be able to come back and beat a really good Nebraska Omaha team was really something. And then the next week we went to Northern Colorado and played them, and we got beat in the last minute at that game. And that was we had some junior college transfer guys at that time, and we had got them in 95, so they had played in 95, 96. And I remember a couple of them, after the game, they were crying. And they just said they thought we were going to win a national championship. And I thought, I was kind of embarrassed because I didn't think we were quite that far along yet. But that told you how fast it turned around, because that mentality, we went from 0-11 2 years ago to 11-2, I think we were that year, because we lost to Pitt and then we lost to Northern Colorado. So, it turned so quickly. And I give our coaches and our players a lot of credit on that.
So take me up to that 98. You have to go through a gauntlet. Northern Colorado was one of the teams you had to beat. Texas A&M, Kingsville. It seemed like they were recurring powerhouses in Division II. They were always waiting for you in those playoffs, much less getting through the MIAA. And you get all the way to that national title game against Carson Newman. Talk to me about that run up to that first national title game.
Well, I want to go back just a minute to 97, because we rolled through 97. We rolled through the season. We were 11-0, hosted the first playoff game, and we beat, I think in 97, we beat North Dakota State in the first round, which was a huge win. Beat them at home. And then the second round, we played Northern Colorado, but we played them at our place. And so, we're going to win. Well, it rained. And Chris Greisen was a junior that year, and I think he threw 4 interceptions in that game. And I remember walking off. We got beat by 10 points or something. And I remember walking off with him. And I said, Chris, when I was at Northwestern College, and this was true in 1981, we got beat by William Jewell in the semifinals at William Jewell. And our quarterback was the number 1 quarterback in the nation. He was a junior, and he had like 30-some touchdown passes and like 6 interceptions. Well, he threw 5 interceptions in that game against William Jewell. And I told Chris, I said the next year he came back and we won the national championship. And Chris, to this day, will still talk about that. He said, that was in my mind that whole year, that next year. But anyway, in 1998, we rolled pretty good. I remember that the expectations had changed so much. I remember some of the seniors, Chris and Steve Coppinger were 2 of them, came in my office. This was late summer, right before fall camp. And they said, Coach, we got a T-shirt for you. And I always had T-shirts that some little saying on them that they wore in the summer for weight workouts. And they gave it to me. It was a green T-shirt. And on the back of it, it said Florence or bust. And I said, I'm not going to wear that T-shirt until we get to the playoffs. They said, well, that's where we're at. And that was their mentality. And so we rolled right through. And then, we played that first playoff game. We played Kingsville. You mentioned Kingsville. That may have been the most talented team I've ever played in Division II. They were amazing. And somehow we found a way to win, and played them at home. And it was a little cold. That might have had a little bit of an effect on them. But from that point on, I think I'm trying to think of who. I think we played Omaha next in the second round, and then Northern Colorado in the third round.
All the usual suspects, it seems like, coming back around each year with those schools.
Yeah, we played Northern Colorado 4 years in a row in the second round. But anyway, so we got to the championship game, and it was so much excitement. Florence was unbelievable the way they treated us. They had hosted the national championship game for a number of years. They just did a first-class job, and it rained, and it rained, and it rained. It was a downpour, all night that night before. I think the fact that we had played in that mud a couple of years before at home, our kids kind of decided that, hey, we can handle this. And we went out, and it was probably to our advantage because Carson Newman was an option team. They had to handle the ball a little more, pitch the ball, and they turned it over a few times, and we came out with a national championship. So it was so rewarding to see the seniors, the 5th-year seniors that year were the ones that were true freshmen in 94. And Chris Greisen was just one of those. But it was just so rewarding to see them win.
And you had a lot of close games in that national final game. This was actually one of the more comfortable ones, I suppose. I don't know if you ever felt comfortable, but
we had a number of close games, but it goes back to that thing that it wasn't one of our players here, but I think it was true here as well. When I was at Northwestern, and we won a lot of games there, and I remember one of the players telling me, he said, Coach, he said, every game, he said, we know we're going to win. He said, we don't want to win. We just know we're going to win. He said, now, he said, do we win every game? No, once in a while we get beat. But he said, the expectation is there. And I think that's the way we got. That mentality was the same with our kids in those close games. Like I said, Kingsville that was an incredible game. That wasn't over until about the last 3 or 4 minutes when we finally held it.
A lot of your wins was kind of like your offense got you points early and your defense had made late stands to hold on to leads. Happened more than once, at least in those big games. It was a combination of the full team effort.
Yeah, and if you look at those games, and I'm not trying to take extra credit because I coached the special teams, and we won. Our special teams were good. They really were. I mean, that game we blocked a punt for a touchdown, and I think we might have run one back for a touchdown against Kingsville. I know we blocked one for a touchdown. It was a combination of everybody doing their job.
You kind of had that Bill Snyder formula.
Yeah.
A little bit. He had that a lot. K-State won a lot of games off special teams.
Yeah, we did. We had some great players. Tony Miles was a phenomenal special teams player. I mean, he and Seneca Holmes, those two guys were, as far as a pair of return guys, they were amazing. And I remember that was in '99 in the national championship game. We were down by 20 points or something to Carson Newman, and they had just scored, and they kicked off to us. Maybe we were down by 24. They kicked off to us, and I remember Seneca Holmes come off the field, and he said they were running back, and he said, Tony said to him, "Get out of my way, dog. I'm taking this into the house."
This concludes part 1 of our interview with Mel Tjeerdsma. Join us soon for part 2 coming your way on Show Me Sports Legacies.